Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Tan Xiaojun, and I'm moderating the fourth YouTube session of the 10th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Yes, it's our 10th anniversary. Now, through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 35 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, the acclaimed YA fantasy author, Emily X.R. Hi, Emily. Welcome to Read for Pixels.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So are we. Now, just a little bit of an intro on Emily. She lives on Lenape land in Brooklyn, New York, but was born in the Midwestern United States to immigrant parents from Taiwan. Her debut novel, The Astonishing Color of After, was a New York Times bestseller, winner of the Apala Honor and Walter Honor Awards, a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize, long-listed for the Carnegie Medal, and featured on over a dozen Best of the Year lists. She received her Masters of Fine Arts in Fiction from the NYU Creative Writing Program, where she was a Goldwater Fellow and editor-in-chief of the program's literary magazine, Washington Square Review. She was the founding editor-in-chief of Bodega Magazine and co-created the Foreshadow platform and anthology. An Arrow to the Moon, a Locus Award finalist, is her second novel. Now, aside from being with us here today, Emily has also generously donated 2 unique and specially curated Asian-inspired gift sets to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Now, bundle number 1 is Emily X.R. The Astonishing Color of After gift set, which is available to US donors only. Now, this deluxe gift set from Emily includes one signed UK edition paperback of The Astonishing Color of After, as you just saw, one miniature art print painted and signed by Emily herself, one pack of sticky notes featuring crane art, one crane iron-on patch, one set of 5 chopsticks featuring book-themed art. Oh, that's so cute. And one jade pendant. Oh, those are the chopsticks. And one jade pendant from Emily's research trip to Taiwan. Ooh, okay. Now, bundle number 2 is Emily X.R. An Arrow to the Moon gift set for US donors only. And this lovely gift set includes one signed hardcover edition of An Arrow to the Moon. Oh, nice. One miniature art print painted and signed by Emily herself. One box of 45 moon phase stickers. One hexagonal piece of moonstone. And one box of 16 steel-etched rabbit paper clips. Oh, those are cute. One miniature book pin. And and one limited edition moon journal from Open Sea Design Co. Oh, nice. Now, just to reiterate, both Emily's bundles are for US donors only, and she only has one of each bundle available. It's first come, first serve, so donate today to get one or both of them before someone else does. We've raised $3,145, which is 31% of our $10,000 goal so far. So please help us to keep the momentum going and give generously before the fundraiser ends in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. If you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you will also be able to ask Emily questions live. Just make sure you're logged on into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen, and Anusha, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Emily to answer. Now, over to Emily. What will you be reading for us today?
Thank you so much. I'm reading the beginning of The Astonishing Color of After. This is the American cover art. And just a quick trigger warning for a mention of suicide. So if you need to step out for a moment, and then you can come back when we have our Q&A, when we have our discussion, that's totally fine. Make sure that you're, taking care of your mental health.
Yeah, so if anyone's uncomfortable listening to Emily's episode, which is related to suicide, just you can come back in about 5 to 10 minutes when we proceed with our discussion with Emily. So go ahead, Emily. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm just starting from the very beginning. My mother is a bird. This isn't like some William Faulkner stream of consciousness metaphorical crap. My mother is literally a bird. I know it's true the way I know the stain on the bedroom floor is as permanent as the sky, the way I know my father will never forgive himself. Nobody believes me, but it is a fact. I am absolutely certain. In the beginning, that mother-shaped hole was made of blood, dark and sticky, soaked to the roots of the carpet. Over and over again, I rewind back to that June afternoon. I walked home from Axel's just in time to see my father stumble out onto the porch, clearly looking for me. I'll never be able to erase that image. His hands slick and shaking, maroon smeared across his temple, chest heaving like it was iron filings getting sucked into his lungs and not air. At first, I thought he was injured. Lee, your mother. He choked on the sentence, face puckering into something awful. When he finally got the words out, his voice crawled through an ocean to get to me. It was a cold cerulean sound, far away and garbled. I couldn't process what he said, not for a long time, not when the police arrived, not even when the people came to carry my mother's body out the front door. Where I was that day, on the old tweed couch in Axel's basement, brushing against his shoulder, trying to ignore the orange wall of electricity between us. If I pressed my mouth to his, what would happen? Would it shock me like a dog collar? Would the wall crumble? Would we fuse together? The better question was, how much could it ruin? My mother knew where I was. That's one of the facts I still can't get over. If I could have climbed out of my goddamn hormones for just 1 minute, maybe my neurotransmitters would have signaled for me to go home. Maybe I would have shaken off my blinders and forced myself to take count of all the things that had been off kilter, or at least noticed that the colors around me were all wrong. Instead, I withdrew into my shell, let myself be one of those self-absorbed, distracted teenagers. During sex ed, our teachers always made it sound like the guys were the horny ones. But right there on that couch, I was certain that some crucial detail about the female body, or at least my body, had been left out. I was an already lit firework, and if Axel came any closer, I was going to barrel into the sky and rain back down in a million pieces. He was wearing the brown plaid that day. It was my favorite of his shirts, the oldest and softest against my cheek when I hugged him. His boy smells wafted over, the sweetness of his deodorant, the smoky floral of some other product, and beneath all that, a scent like the quiet grass at night. In the end, he was the one to take off his glasses and kiss me. But instead of bursting into sparks, my body froze. If I shifted a millimeter, everything would break. Even thinking that word, kiss, was like touching an ice wand to my chest. My ribs seized, freezing solid and spiderwebbing with cracks. I was no longer a firework. I was a thing frozen deep in the Arctic. Axel's hand stretched around my back and unlocked me. I was melting. He had released my wind-up key, and I was kissing back hard. And our lips were everywhere, and my body was fluorescent orange. No, royal purple. No, my body was every color in the world, a light. We'd been eating chocolate-covered popcorn just minutes ago, and that was exactly how he tasted, sweet and salty. An explosion of thoughts made me pull away. The cloud of debris consisted of remembering that he was my best friend, that he was the only person I trusted 100% besides mom, that I shouldn't be kissing him, couldn't be kissing him. What color? Axel said quietly. This is the question we always ask to figure out what the other person's feeling. We've been best friends since Mrs. Donovan's art class, long enough that that's all we need. One color to describe a mood, a success, a failure, a wish. I couldn't answer him, couldn't tell him I was flashing through the whole goddamn spectrum, including a new dimension of hues I'd never before experienced. Instead, I stood up. Shit, I breathed. What? He said. Even in the dim light of the lone basement bulb, I could see how his face was flushed. My hands, I didn't know where to put my hands. Sorry, I have to go. We had a no bullshit rule with each other. I kept breaking it. Seriously, Lee? He said, but I was already running up the stairs, grabbing at the railing to pull myself up faster. I burst into the hallway outside the living room and gulped down breaths like I'd just broken the surface after the deepest dive. He didn't follow. The front door slammed as I left. Even his house was pissed at me. The sound rang out puke green. I thought of the hardcover of a book smacking shut on a story that wasn't finished. I never saw the body up close. The police arrived and I raced ahead of them, up the stairs 2 at a time, burst into the master bedroom with a force that nearly cracked the door. All I could see were my mother's legs on the floor, horizontal and sticking out from the other side of the bed. And then Dad was behind me, pulling me out of the way while my ears rang with the shrieking. It was so loud I was certain it was a noise brought by the police. Only when I stopped to catch my breath did I realize the shrieking was coming from me, my own mouth, my own lungs. I saw the stain after they removed my mother, after someone had made a first attempt at cleaning it out of the carpet. Even then, it was still dark and wide, oblong and hideous, barely the shape of a mother. It's easier to pretend the stain is acrylic paint, pigment, emulsion, water-soluble until it dries. The one part that's hard to pretend about, spilled paint, is only ever an accident. Spilled paint doesn't involve a knife and a bottle of sleeping pills. The day after it happened, we spent hours searching for a note. That was the surreal part. Dad and I floated around the house, moving sloth-like as we pulled at drawers, flipped open cabinets, traced our fingers along shelves. It's not real unless we find a note. That was the thought that kept running through my brain. Of course she would leave a note. I refused to go into the master bedroom. It was impossible to forget. Mom's feet sticking out from behind the bed, my blood pounding. She's dead. She's dead. She's dead. I leaned against the wall out in the hallway and listened to Dad riffling through the papers, searching, moving from one side of the room to the other, sounding as desperate as I felt. I heard him open her jewelry box and shut it again, heard him shifting things around on the bed. He must have been looking under the pillows, under the mattress. Where the hell did people usually leave their notes? If Axel were there with me, he probably would have squeezed my shoulder and asked, what color? And I would have had to explain that I was colorless, translucent. I was a jellyfish caught up in a tide, forced to go wherever the ocean willed. I was as unreal as my mother's non-existent note. If there was no note, what did that mean? My father must have found something because everything on the other side of the door had gone intensely quiet. Dad, I called out. There was no response, but I knew he was there. I knew he was conscious, standing on the other side, hearing me. Dad, I said again. I heard a long, thick intake of breath. My father shuffled to the door and opened it. You found it? I said. He paused, not meeting my eyes, hesitating. Finally, his hand swept out a crumpled piece of paper. It was in the garbage, he said, his voice tight, along with these. His other fingers uncurled to show a pile of capsules that I recognized immediately, Mom's antidepressants. He crunched them up in his fist and went back downstairs. A cyan chill seeped into my body. When had she stopped taking her medicine? And I will end there. That was the beginning of The Astonishing Color of After.
Yeah, and it's a very hard-hitting introduction to a book, I have to say. Right. Okay, now let's jump straight into the questions. Your two books feature fascinating female protagonists, like Lei in The Astonishing Color of After, as we just heard, and Luna in An Arrow to the Moon, who are complex characters with agency, but also very human. Now, what or who are your inspirations for your female characters?
Oh gosh, I think all of my characters come a little bit from myself. Even the antagonists, even the kind of evil ones or the characters that I write to be unlikable. I
Mm,
definitely pull from facets of myself and experiences from myself. I also pull from, strong women in my family and friends and people who have inspired me or have moved me. So I
mm.
kind of draw from everything, but I think first and foremost, I have to pull from myself.
Oh, cool. Okay, so that's interesting. Now, as we know, all genres have their share of female stereotypes and tropes, and your stories revolve around Asian female characters, specifically those of Taiwanese Chinese heritage. So it's probably not a stretch to deduce that the risk of stereotyping is tripled when genre, gender, and race intersect. So, how do you break such stereotypes to create female characters with agency while dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. I think the the first part about stereotypes, this is
Mm,
kind of one of my favorite craft questions to think about, because what is a stereotype except really a general boiling down of an identity, right?
mm,
Um, and so when we're trying to write a character that is multifaceted, that feels like a real human in their own right, maybe there's something about them that surface level, if you boiled it down, if you oversimplified it, it would sound like a stereotype. But
mm,
what's the underlying motivation beneath all that? I give the example of um, somebody might have like let's say there's like an Asian boy character that people are like, well, he's a mathlete, he's really good at math, he's on the math team in his school, and that's it, that's the stereotype, right?
mm,
Well, how would we dig into that character? Why does he love math? What makes math
mm,
special to him? What
mm,
makes math important to him in a way that it wouldn't to other characters? You know,
mm,
so taking the stereotype of like just someone being good at math just because they're Asian, just because there's a preconceived notion of like the
mm,
way a student like him might perform, but then maybe it's that math is really important because it is what reminds him of his relationship with his grandmother. Maybe like
mm,
they sat around doing math when he was growing up. Maybe math to him feels like poetry. It feels like a form of
mm,
expression. Maybe it's his way of processing the world. So if you really dig down into like that nitty gritty,
mm,
then you have a character, right? And so anytime I'm writing any character, I think about, well, what are the surface expectations that might be imposed upon a character, and what can I dig into, what can I learn more about my character to understand why the character might meet certain stereotypes but also break certain stereotypes. And I think that's where it gets interesting. As for the topic of writing women, writing girls, um, I was one of those kids growing up who um, I kind of really rejected the idea of, well, what should I be wearing? How should I be
mm,
behaving?
mm.
My mom is very like into the idea of being prim and proper and very
Aw,
feminine, and I
mm,
was always like, but why do I have to be that way? Like that could be you, but
mm,
what about my own self-expression and my identity? And so I think about that a lot when I'm writing girls.
mm,
And so, in An Arrow to the Moon, Hunter and Luna, who are my Romeo and Juliet characters slash
mhm,
my Hou-Yi and Chang'e characters, for those
mhm,
who might be familiar with the myth that it draws from,
mm.
I purposely wanted to write Hunter as a softer character. I wanted to write this
Ah,
boy who people had like imposed these expectations upon, who had imposed these surface level assumptions upon, and twist them a little bit. And then I wanted Luna to be this character who, her family perceives her one way. They have expectations of her. They kind of want her to be their idea of, living the ideal life, or their idea of what a daughter should be. And she has this undercurrent of anger and resentment that starts to bubble up, that is,
mm.
by her family's definition would be kind of unbecoming. And that was my way of playing with the idea of, well, what does society expect from us
Mm.
versus how do we choose to exist, and how do we lay claim to our own agency and become ourselves.
Nice. Okay, we'll come back to Hunter in a bit because I've got a couple of questions about your male characters, but to pick up further on your thought about female characters. So, your female characters are resilient and compelling in their individual ways as they face difficult situations and problems, although also generally flawed in some way, as are all people. However, these characteristics in the case of Asian and other non white female characters might result in some readers perceiving them as unlikable, as compared to if they were male and white. So, when you write, do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural expectations to make your female characters relatable and likable? Particularly with negative contradicting stereotypes about both Dragon Lady and submissive Asian women still very much alive.
I definitely was thinking about that when I was writing Lee's mother.
Mm,
I've
mm,
been asked I've been asked a few times why I didn't make her into a tiger mom and why instead I wrote the Lee's white father as being kind of the more imposing and demanding and um, and unreasonably focused on the practicality rather than the passion.
mm. Yeah.
And and that was kind of me wanting to rebel against the stereotype a little bit,
Mm,
because I didn't like the idea of, well, just because she has an Asian mother, the Asian mother is going to be a tiger mom. I very much resent the assumption that people make that if there's an Asian mother, she by default is going to be a tiger mom. I
yeah.
I kind of am almost even angry that the term tiger mom even exists, because it
Yeah.
just like is this it's just like, okay, slap a label on there and that's what you have. And so I really was thinking about that when I wrote Lee's mom. I wanted her to be so supportive of Lee's art. I wanted her to be
Mm,
really encouraging. I wanted her to understand what it's like to want to pursue that passion, because I also have had friends with Asian mothers who were like that, as they were growing up. I have had friends whose Asian mothers were artists who
mm,
very much wanted their children to pursue these things that were maybe not stereotypically accepted, not an engineer,
mm.
not a doctor, not a lawyer.
Yeah.
Um, and and so I wanted to capture that. I also um, I think I do worry a little bit. There's this huge responsibility placed on authors of color because
Mm,
we don't have enough representation in
mm,
literature, right? And so the problem with the lack of representation is that anything that I write is, in danger of being perceived as trying to describe a monolith, as
mm.
trying to make some aspect of my culture, or like maybe my entire heritage, which is already a very complex heritage unto itself, right? Like I identify
Yeah.
as both Taiwanese and Chinese, and that's a very complicated thing.
Mm,
And so, I definitely have encountered white readers who then assume that I've captured everything there is to know about Chinese culture or Taiwanese culture,
mm,
and or they mash the two together and assume that they know everything now, and both are the same, and that's very frustrating because I don't want to have the burden of that. We need more representation. We need more authors of every background being published so that, somebody
mm,
might read my novels and be like, well, I don't connect with these characters. But then there's another author who is Chinese
mm.
and or Taiwanese, and they connect with that author's stories, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I'm writing, I definitely think about, okay, does this character somehow am I, unwittingly pinning some type of Asian female stereotype onto this character? And if I
Yeah.
am doing so, why? Like I try to
Mm,
interrogate it. And I try really hard, again, going back to what I was saying before about how I think about stereotypes and how I think about my characters. I try to unpack it and peel back the layers until I can understand a character at this core level that I think and hope prevents me from just writing a stereotype.
Oh, nice. And so picking up on what you said about, getting feedback about Lay's mom not being a tiger mom, I mean, have you ever received any criticism or pushback for your female characters being unlikable?
I've seen it in reviews.
Ah,
They say that authors should not read their own book reviews. And I agree. That's a very wise statement, and people should
mm-hmm.
definitely take that advice. But I have definitely read my reviews, and I've seen people say that, and I think it's interesting because I mean, the idea of what is likable or unlikable is in many ways cultural, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's not even I'm not even just saying like cultural as in like broadly speaking American, for example. I mean like what is likable in a personality in California might be very different than what's likable in a personality in Texas. And
Mm.
so when people say that, I don't get too bothered by it. And I have this same because I'm a creative writing professor, and
Mm-hmm.
I oftentimes find myself having this conversation with my students when we're talking about books that we read, where I say, okay, so you've identified this character that you're reading about as unlikable, but what do you think is the author's intent? Why do you think the
Mm.
author has written the character this way? And what do you think the character's emotional motivations are intended to be? I
Mm.
don't think it's problematic for a character to be unlikable, especially if I'm trying to write somebody who is realistic. And I think most people, um, though well intentioned, will still have morally gray decisions and actions in their life. And so I try to capture some of that. I try to have some
Mm.
moments where, like Lee or Luna, are doing things that are not the most ethical or not the smartest choice, and they're kind of driven by emotion or in the moment are just being a little bit impulsive, right? And I think that's
Mm.
true to life. And so that's more my concern is the emotional motivation there, and does it feel true to life?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can't all be Mary Sue's, can we now?
Yeah.
Okay, now your stories definitely pass the Bechdel test with their depiction of complex and interesting relationships between women. For example, between Lei and her mother, and between Lei and Feng in The Astonishing Color of After. And for those watching who are not familiar with the Bechdel test, it basically asks whether a work, whether book, movie, TV series, etc., features at least two women talking to each other about something other than men. Now, why do you think that some YA authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that YA is female dominated, and of course that there are many more things that girls talk about other than boys and men?
I think it goes back to the greater question of what's presented in media. Like
Mm,
how many movies are there that pass the Bechdel test? You
ha,
know,
mm,
and so I think that it's hard to avoid that influence if like the vast majority of the storytelling that you're experiencing is based around romance and based around the question of, are these characters going to end up together, and that's the primary obsession of the main character, then
mm,
it's going to be hard, especially obviously in like a in heterosexual character depictions. It's going to be hard to pass the Bechdel test. And so for me, I think it's that, I'm a romantic. I love love stories. Obviously, my novels have love stories and
mhm,
are centered around love stories, but I think that life is so much more complicated than that, and I want my novels to feel like I'm capturing like this slice of life that includes all of the complications and the nuances and the things outside of just this bubble of whatever is the peak interest,
mm,
like some, I think similarly, a lot of YA novels don't really have parents in them. And when I was a teenager, so much of my life was informed by my parents, right? Like if I wanted to go and do something and it didn't match my parents' schedule, then I couldn't do it. Like that's
mm,
pretty
mm,
restraining, right? Like I so much of my life was determined based off of what my parents would allow me to do, what my parents would encourage me to do, what I was trying to do without my parents finding out. All of these things my parents are very much at the forefront of my mind. I think that's true for most teenagers. And so when I write YA, I write with that in mind, and the parents of course are going to be very present in the story, because I think that's a huge part of their life. So to me, it's kind of like the stories that maybe don't pass the Bechdel test they've taken the lens and they've zoomed in so close on this one facet of human existence, and they're kind of just focusing on that question of, well, is this guy and this girl going to end up together? And I think for me, it's I don't even think about whether I'm going to pass the Bechdel test. I'm thinking more about, am I capturing an accurate slice of this character's life?
Okay. And okay, so to expand further on that, man, to kind of tap on your professorial hat, are there any other tips that you can give or suggestions for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically?
I think it's about understanding, again, going back to emotional motivation, character motivation. And I honestly think that writing is first and foremost about understanding yourself. So, really being able to dig down and think about, okay, well, what motivated me to make this complicated choice? Or what motivated me to want to be friends with these people who were maybe not the healthiest people for me to be friends with? Any circumstance in your life, right? And then drawing from that to write characters that feel real and not like they're cut out of, I don't know, a magazine or something. Or I think it's really just about trying to flesh out characters as much as possible. And I think that first and foremost comes with self-examination.
Okay, interesting. So basically, explore why the character is doing what he's doing, right?
Yeah, and trying to understand why you did the things that you've done in your life.
Like, sometimes I was just being stupid. Okay, so let's hop onto your male characters. Though there are some misogynistic characters in your books, the male-female relationships between the main characters are generally quite equitable, and your main male characters like Axel and Lay's father Brian in The Astonishing Color of After and Hunter in An Arrow to the Moon are respectful of women, their thoughts, and decisions. So earlier you mentioned about trying to make Axel someone with more soft skills than most guys, perhaps. So do you think that reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways YA writers can break away from harmful tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
100%. I think we need, again, going back to how important representation is, right? We need examples in media. We need examples in storytelling of boys and men who are allowed to be soft, who are allowed to have unusual interests or maybe more feminine interests, and who don't have to be macho, who don't have to exhibit physical strength. We need examples of humans, period. I mean, when you look at like how movies portray men, if you think about like an action film, just the idea of like an action hero movie, you like, just me saying those words, you probably have already brought to mind like a very muscular, sculpted man who clearly works out a lot and is capable of carrying really heavy weight and doing martial arts, right? That's the first thing that pops into our head. Why is that? Why can't we have more action hero films where there's like a nerdy boy who is, you know, thin and has glasses and is, I don't know, germophobic and you know, and doesn't like to do physical things like that. How incredible would it be if that was as normal as the muscular stereotype that we have? And so that's definitely something I think about a lot when I'm writing my male characters, because, you know, a lot of my best friends in my life have been softer men, have been quieter men who they did not have the priorities that would be presented in media. And I think young people who are coming of age, they learn from the media that they see, whether the media is intended to be teaching them life values or not. Right? Like they take away what they see on screen. They see a big action hero movie that is like the blockbuster of the season. And they think, well, that's what people like. That's what's attractive. That's what's going to make me successful in life. And I think it's really sad for things to be so limiting. And so, you know, even in An Arrow to the Moon, Hunter has his little brother, Cody, and Hunter is kind of this role model for Cody. And I wrote Cody to be an even softer character, right? So like Hunter himself is already, I write him as this sensitive, softer boy character. And then his little brother is even softer, even more of like a cinnamon roll, and Hunter is nurturing of that. Like I wrote that on purpose, to have an older brother be nurturing of softness in his younger brother.
Yeah. As our producer Anusha mentioned, you know, cinnamon rolls. And speaking of action hero stereotypes, do you think that eventually the violent alpha male type character will phase out of YA as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that will stick around for much longer than expected?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I hope that we'll have a shift away from that. I think it's really tricky because so much of what like editors acquire now is influenced by what they saw growing up in terms of media, and also what's in media right now. You know, there's this echo chamber, everything feeds off of everything else. And so I think we've made some like tiny minuscule steps away from toxic masculinity, but still not enough. You know, we still need, just again, like I was saying before, more representation. It's not that like yeah, macho masculine, I shouldn't use masculine in that regard, but like macho muscular men exist, and that's great. But what about all the other men? What about, you know, the men who like what about the boys who like want to sit in a library and read all day, and the boys who want to garden, and the boys who want to star in musicals and dance? Why don't we have more stories about those? And YA, I think, is at the front of media as a whole in terms of more of these stories being put out, but it's still not enough. And so I hope it's already so much better now than when I was coming of age, you know, in terms of the literature that's available, the types of stories that are being written. Editors are acquiring more diversely than ever before. So we've got, you know, a lot of people who are queer, writing queer stories. We've got a lot of people who are writing boys of color who don't fit the certain stereotypes that have kind of been expected of boys of color in literature for a few decades now. I think that the improvement is slow, but hopefully, I hope that in another couple decades, I can look back and be like, wow, we've actually moved the needle. We've actually gone somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. Okay, so my next my next couple of questions are about stories and storytelling. So I think this is a good time to have this question from the audience. This is from Misty306. Hi, Misty. Misty is one of our regulars. Now, Misty is asking, your stories can be read by both adolescents and adults, yet it's clear your books are written for a YA audience. How were you able to write for teens?
I think everything that I write, when I'm writing YA, everything is written with teenage Emily in mind. Like, I am writing the stories that I wish I had been able to pick up and read when I was a teenager. I'm thinking back to what were my obsessions, what were my concerns when I was a teenager. And so I'm really just channeling that. And all of my, I tend to wrestle with the question of identity again and again. I feel like everything I write ends up being about identity. And that was something I was wrestling with so much as a teenager and have wrestled with my entire life. And so I think in some ways writing about that is like being able to access this time capsule of myself. But I also I think that I don't think teenagers are that different from other humans. I think that, so I think writing a human experience, it's easy to make that a teenage experience. The difference is that a lot of these things are being experienced for the first time when you're writing in a teenage context, because it's their first time with enough autonomy to go out in the world. It's their first time falling in love. It's their first time being given a chance to do something big. And that creates this energy and excitement. And so at the end of the day, I'm just trying to write a very human story that I hope would feel like it rings true across all ages of grown people, but because I'm writing a lot about first time experiences, I think that's probably what makes it feel like it's more specifically for teens.
Yeah, it's like we feel everything so much more intensely, right, when it's the first time. So I feel that really comes through in your writing.
Yeah, because the first time you don't know how to navigate the difficult emotions,
Yeah.
Navigating heartbreak is just as hard the 17th time as it is the first time. But the first time,
Yeah.
you've never experienced it. So you have no idea what it's going to be like to get through it, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of unknown makes everything feel so much bigger.
Yeah, true. And okay. So Misty does have comments about what we were talking about earlier about the media. So I'll just pop it here. So she says, "I'm sorry, but can we mention how media influences everyone, but only when everyone else enables it? For example, a brother and a sister are watching a stereotypical scene on TV, and however, neither the mother nor the father explains to their children the positives and the negatives on the TV show. Who's at fault? The TV show, the parents, or a combination of both?" So
I
yeah.
would say, that are the parents at fault if the parents haven't even unpacked those stereotypes themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like, how many people are sitting around doing that work of unpacking everything that they see? Most of the time when people turn on the TV, they're looking for a distraction. They're not looking to like sink into a philosophical questioning of everything. I think it's wonderful that there's a fraction of the world that will do that, but I don't think that is the majority of people. And so that makes me feel like it's, the production companies that really need to be sitting up and taking notice. I mean, in publishing circles, we talk about this all the time, how it feels like film is like 100 years behind us in terms of progressiveness, in terms of what type of representation is allowed, what type of representation is considered worthy of being presented on a screen. We're having conversations in publishing about representation, about gender identity, about violence, about so many facets of the human experience that it feels like we haven't been able to talk about in so many ways. We haven't had the language to talk about. When it comes to like gender identity, I'm thinking about how even like a decade ago, I didn't hear anyone talk about non-binary identity. I had friends who like didn't know that they were non-binary because they had no awareness that was even an option to them. And in film, these conversations are so far behind, and so it's kind of frustrating that so much of everything that we talk about is like, oh, what movie's coming out, what's streaming on Netflix, and those forms of media are the ones that are a little bit like dragging their heels, and those producers, those makers are reluctant to have the conversations that are needed. They're reluctant to change something when it feels like what they've got has been working great, right? Like it's about making money. It's about what's going to be popular. But until we get more filmmakers, and we've been getting smaller independent film companies making really incredible content. But again, it's that question of representation. It's that question of quantity. Until we have enough of it, I think it's going to be tricky. And the more that we have, I think the more people will begin to unpack things. I think what is really wonderful about media and storytelling and presenting things in the form of art and entertainment is that we can kind of like sneak in there. We're kind of like the Trojan horses. Like we bring an idea to you and hopefully you're tuning in for the entertainment, but hopefully something in your brain gets unlocked. Like hopefully you discover new ideas, or maybe you'll find a new way of thinking about things that hadn't occurred to you before. Like if we can get more of TV doing that, how incredible would that be? Right? Like we get more of that in books than in film.
Yeah. And I want to zoom in on one specific topic, which is consent and coercion. And so the line between these two is not always very clear in YA books, especially some of the older YA fantasies. Do you think that this is an issue that writers in the YA space have started tackling successfully in recent years?
I think it's really, really tricky. I'm personally not very happy with how consent is generally portrayed. I think it's tricky because there are so many examples of things that are still treated as like romantic, like I'm like struggling to come up with a specific example right now, and I also don't want to like poo-poo any specific authors, because we're all learning together. But I think it's difficult because yes, conversations about consent these days are much more nuanced than they have been, but people who are writing YA are still, a lot of my generation, I think, is still drawing from what was considered romantic when we were coming of age. And a lot of that revolves around consent being a little bit fuzzy, like
it's like grab you and kiss you kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like I personally don't think it's very romantic if like the girl isn't, talking about a heterosexual couple. The girl's like not really sure what she wants, and the guy just grabs her and kisses her. That feels like that's fuzzy on consent. He can't make an assumption that she's going to be into it, right? Or like, historically we've had things be portrayed where like a girl will say like, no, I don't want you to come, and then the guy shows up anyway, and that's viewed as like romantic, like he's gonna go do it and go get it. And is that romantic, or is that crossing a boundary? Is that like not respecting somebody's wishes? And so I think a lot of this gets tricky, and I think there is still, I'm pretty radically feminist, and I think a lot of what is considered romantic still draws from kind of old-fashioned notions.
Yes.
And so that's where I think the problem is, because drawing from old-fashioned ideas of what is romantic then kind of like creates this friction against what is true consent.
Okay. So, what would you suggest to YA and fantasy authors who wish to include violence against women in their books and or explore violence against women as a major theme? How do how do you deal with that?
I think it's frustrating to me when violence, especially violence against women, is included just as a thrilling plot point.
Mm,
I don't think that that's how that topic should be handled. I don't I don't find it thrilling. I don't find it making for interesting storytelling. I think it's different if it's like, I'm going to write about this and I'm going to explore it thoroughly and with care, and I'm going to unpack it. And I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about the psychological results and
right.
consequences, versus it being something that's put into literature, put into a scene. I think a lot of epic fantasy is guilty of this. It's put in there for
Mm,
shock value, right?
yes.
It
Yeah.
should not be in there for shock value because that normalizes it happening without us having conversations about how messed up it is and how horribly it can ruin someone's life.
True.
I think I think there are a lot of really big popular fantasy franchises out there that have made use of violence against women
Mm,
as just like a plot point to demonstrate how evil someone is. And
yeah.
that feels a little bit like lazy storytelling to me. Like there are other ways to show how a person is evil, and more interesting ways. But it also, I think people will think, oh well, I'll just give this character PTSD and then I've dealt with it. Like, good job,
Oh,
But
yeah.
but it's so much more nuanced and complicated than that. That I think if something like that is going to be addressed, it kind of feels like it needs to. I don't want to say that it. I mean, I kind of feel like it needs to take center stage if that's going to be
Mm,
put in literature. Like it needs to
mm,
be fully examined,
mm-hmm.
because otherwise, how are we going to prevent that violence from happening again? Like,
Yeah.
how many people are going to see that and be like, well, oh well, that's just an example of like a big thing that happens, and how many people are going to go and like mimic mimic the violence that they see on screen with no regard for the consequences, and how many people are going to be unable to support friends who experience that violence because their only reference point is media that has poorly portrayed the aftermath.
Mm. Yeah. I want to kind of say write responsibly.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Okay. Well, time has really passed very fast, and like we are on to the last question now, which is a two-part question, and it's a bit of a obvious question, but we ask this for everyone. You have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against work as a whole. So the first part is, why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And the second part is, what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
I think that, it's really important that we highlight what is happening, because everybody understands, oh, violence is bad, period, right? Like this like blanket idea that violence is bad. But until we look at the intricacies of what women experience, and that's women of inclusive of um, anybody who identifies as femme, right? That's
Mhm.
inclusive of trans women. That's um, it's there is so much violence that I think people are unaware of. Like, people hear violence and they have in mind these ideas of like, oh, maybe there's a gun involved, maybe there's like sexual assault involved, maybe there's I don't know, murder involved, maybe there's torture involved, but there's also psychological abuse. That's a different type of violence. There's domestic abuse, there's manipulation that prevents women from having autonomy and keeps them trapped in terrible circumstances, and that's a different type of violence, right? That's not a violence that involves guns necessarily, but that is a type of violence. And so I think the more we have conversations about this, the more that maybe people will sit up and pay attention, or even just learn and understand how to be better allies, how to be more compassionate, and also how to like know how to help the people in their lives.
And
then the second part of your question, remind me again.
So what do you think authors specifically can do to help with making the change?
I think it goes back to so much of what we've been talking about. Like you said, write responsibly, think very carefully about what type of violence is being portrayed and why it's being written, and think about what's the effect for readers, and also what's the effect for people who are in those very real situations, and how can we help? How can we use our voices? I think as authors, we're uniquely positioned in that we have audiences. And so it feels to me like a responsibility comes with that, in terms of the types of stories that I'm going to choose to tell, the types of stories that I'm going to spend my time on and devote my life to. I'm going to think very carefully. Obviously, I'm writing for me, but I'm also thinking very carefully about what do I want other people to take away from this. And I think if all of us can think about that more intentionally, I think we can really improve the landscape of literature.
And on that excellent note, we come to the end of the Q&A part of our session. Thank you so much, Emily, for those insightful answers. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. And so just to recap, aside from spending her time here with us today, Emily has also generously donated a couple of awesome goodie bundles to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. And they are bundle number 1, Emily X.R. Pan's The Astonishing Color of After gift set. And Emily's going to do her show and tell again. So this deluxe gift set, includes one signed UK edition paperback of The Astonishing Color of After, one miniature art print painted and signed by Emily herself, one pack of sticky notes featuring crane art, one crane iron-on patch, and one set of 5 chopsticks featuring book-themed art, and one jade pendant from Emily's research trip to Taiwan. And bundle number 2 is Emily X.R. Pan's An Arrow to the Moon gift set, which is for US donors only as well. And this lovely gift set includes one signed hardcover edition of An Arrow to the Moon, one miniature art print painted and signed by Emily herself, and that's different to the other one box of 45 moon face stickers, one hexagonal piece of moonstone, one box of 16 steel etched rabbit paper clips, one miniature book pen, and one limited edition moon journal from Open Sea Design Co. Now, both Emily's bundles are for donors who are based in the US only, and she only has one of each bundle available. It's first come, first serve, so donate today to get one or both of them before someone else does. There are also plenty more goodies available from authors and publishers such as Anne Bishop, Brandon Sanderson, C.S.E. Cooney, Dana Cameron, Grim Oak Press, Mary Robinette Kowal, Meg Gardiner, S.J. Rosen, and more. New goodies will be released every week throughout September. We have raised $3,145, which is 31% of our $10,000 goal so far. So please help us keep the momentum going and give generously before the fundraiser ends next month. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And Okay, and here are the links. So you can donate to get these goodies on RallyUp at tinyurl.com/R4P RallyUp 2023. And be careful, it's a cap sensitive. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, including our upcoming author live streams and special 10th anniversary panel sessions, go to bit.ly/Read for Pixels. And let me change this. Okay, so the Pixel Project also has its very own Shirley Jackson Award nominated and Audie Award nominated charity anthology called Giving the Devil His Due, which is kind of like the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman. Now, it is currently available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook editions and can be ordered from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Audible, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Spotify, Google Play, and more. For more, and here's the other one. Yeah. For more information about the anthology and how to score a book plate specially signed by one of the anthology's authors, visit bit.ly/giving the devil his due. And here's our audiobook version, which is available from Audible, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Kobo, Chirp, and other major audiobook retailers worldwide. And for more information about the audiobook, you can visit tinyurl.com/GTDHD audiobook R4P. Now, all net proceeds go towards the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one. And, it'll help us keep us alive and kicking. And please note that this anthology is a limited run, which is only available until October 31st. That's the end of next month. So get your copy or copies now before it goes out of print. To find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. And now I will say thank you and have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Okay.